So much for watching. On today's program, we have invited our friend, Dr. Barry Bussey, to come back and to talk to us a little bit about the intersection of the law and religion. Dr. Bussey, welcome back.
Great to be with you, Bill.
You know, we always enjoy your time with us, and we always learn so much more about, you know, this vital area of freedoms and religious freedom and freedom to express ourselves. And so thank you for joining us. And for those of you that don't know, we're going to have Dr. Bussey sort of give us a brief introduction. But, you know, I think Barry has set himself apart as a real spokesperson for religious freedom. He's argued before the Supreme Court. And I'm just thrilled that every time you come out.
Well, it's great to be here. I'm just as thrilled as well. So.
And then recently, you initiated a brand new venture, First Freedoms Foundation. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that also?
Sure. Well, First Freedoms comes from it's freedom of speech, freedom of conscience and religion, and the inviolability of the person, which means basically that government can't just take us, do something to us, the person, without the proper rule of law. So it comes, we got the idea from Justice Ivan Rand, a 1953 Supreme Court of Canada decision, when Justice Rand said there are these three, what he called original freedoms, and in our group we were talking, okay, well, what should we call this new entity? And we called it First Freedoms Foundation. So we're not a charity, but we are a nonprofit. And the reason why we chose not to be a charity is simply because we don't want to be, because we're going to be dealing with a lot of political issues and we didn't want to deal with CRA and all of, the various regulations that a lot of charities have to be concerned with. Yeah.
Wow, that in and of itself is a topic, right?
Yeah.
Just the interference, right? And the potential for interference.
Yeah, and
should you be articulating points of view that may be contrary to what the government of the day has as their
and unfortunately, this is becoming more and more of an issue. We saw it in the last federal election, for example, when the Prime Minister said, look, if you're pro-life and you're giving misinformation, and that's just, the misinformation is information that we disagree with, right, in essence, then we're going to take away charitable status of those groups. Now, they haven't done it yet, and I think given what's happened over this current year, I suspect there's so much upheaval right now that the government hasn't pulled that lever yet, but who knows what might happen down the road.
But you would think that just a government official making that statement has a chilling effect on
absolutely.
Organizations.
Oh,
right?
Sure. And it's one of the reasons why I have a real big concern. In fact, I published a book some time ago on this whole issue of charitable status and religious communities, and there is no question in my mind that one of the big reasons why a lot of various religious communities are not speaking out to public policy issues is because they're scared of violating CRA regulations. Now, it is quite wide, the CRA regulation, that allows a fair bit of commentary and discussion, even on political issues, public policy issues. But when you have the Prime Minister make statements like that, then you know full well that it's having a chilling effect across the board, and which is unfortunate, because we need to have as many voices as possible in the public square, and we're not having a whole lot of that because people are just mindful of it. And I'm not taking away from our general understanding of separation of church and state and all that kind of thing, but it's just that when you're dealing with issues that the community has to deal with, even the whole idea in the last couple of years with closing down churches, during the mandates and all the rest, and that was something that a lot of people would have expected even more churches. And, there were some churches that were, kind of pushing the envelope on that. But a lot of churches just were very quiet. and for all kinds of reasons. But I can't help but think that part of the chilling is the fact that they're afraid to speak.
But yeah, so what I find so fascinating here is that is happening, though, where we have a document, the charter,
Yes.
that is supposed to govern or regulate how government actually acts, right?
Yeah.
And to respect the freedom of conscience, the freedom of expression of individuals. So, like, is that document really as powerful as that I was led to, that I was led to believe it is? I mean, it's
Yeah, Bill, I tell you, a lot of people are asking that question, especially those who have been under the brunt, as it were, of the regulations over the last number of years, because, for example, with the whole vaccine mandate and all that kind of thing. People not able to fly, people getting fired from their jobs and all that kind of stuff. And so there are a lot of people questioning, okay, so they go to court, and what we've seen for the majority of the cases so far, we've seen the courts ruling in favor of the government on this. For example, the McMaster students tried to get some redress because they were denied religious exemption on the vaccine mandate at the university, and the court basically said, well, you're in the wrong venue. You should be actually with the Human Rights Tribunal, but since you're here, we'll give you our opinion on things. And the opinion was such that the government was praised. Let's face it. I mean, we originally didn't know what was what with this whole COVID pandemic, but I think as time went on, we got a lot more information, and it was not near dire as what it was made out to be at the beginning. But even allowing differences of opinion, allowing religious exemptions, which historically we've always allowed it,
right.
In a big way. We've always accommodated religion, but and so for those students, for religious exemption, one would have thought it would have been, if you're shown that you're sincere in your belief and all the rest, and it would be accommodated. But that's not how it went. We saw, for example, airlines would have a application process for religious exemptions.
Right.
And then they virtually, certainly Air Canada was one that gave very few. In fact, I'm not even sure how many religious exemptions. It seemed to me it was like very small number. Whereas on the medical side, they gave exemptions no problem. Well, in comparison with the medical. And then with the recent court cases that have been going on right now, with the Peckford case, the Bernier case, that JCCF, which is the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom, doing great work across the country in looking after the legal fees and hiring lawyers to do these cases. And what we found out in the material that was filed at the federal court is that Air Canada from the get-go did not want to give any religious exemption, and even was counseling with the government lawyers as to how they could not give religious exemption. And that is, that's very strange. And so a lot of people say, okay, well, what about the charter, right? How come the charter hasn't been protected? Well, here's the thing. In order to get the charter to actually protect us, we have to take the matter to court.
Okay.
And so we have to go to court, and we have to, present the arguments and all the rest. But what's been happening is that over the last, certainly the last 10, 15 years, the Supreme Court of Canada has been making decisions that have been consistently giving support of government to carry out its regulations and the law and all the rest. But it's government actors. And so, for example, when the government passes a law in this country, it usually makes the law very broad.
Okay.
All right? So you can, you know, it might be designed for a gnat, but they design it for an elephant. I mean,
Right.
it's like really broad. And then that means the person on the front line, the administrator,
Okay.
we call them government actors, they are the regulators. They're the ones who are actually, you know, you come up to the wicket, they make a decision. And those people are given very, very a wide margin of opportunity to be able to act on these matters. And the problem is that what happens when the government, in its imposition of regulation, i.e., most recently with the vaccine and the whole COVID regulation, and then they make a decision that has a huge impact on people's rights, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, mobility rights.
Right.
Then what will happen is that they make that decision. They're not a court. They're not whatever. They're an authority. They're a government authority, but it affects your right away. Boom.
Right.
The only recourse you have is to go to court.
I gotta go to court. I see.
But what was happening under this COVID experience is that when you go to court to try to get redress, your court case is going to be punched out probably 6, 7, 8, 9, maybe even 12 months ahead. And so, but you've lost your job.
Right.
Right?
So what do you do in the meantime?
Yeah, exactly. And not only that, but you're not even going to get unemployment insurance.
Right.
Right? Because you failed to follow the regulation or the rule at the workplace and all the rest that the government is imposing, that they have to follow that regulation to require a vaccine mandate, a vaccine. So the problem is that in between time, before you can actually get to court, you've got a situation where the charter right is being already infringed, right? Until the court says otherwise.
Right. Okay.
The court will determine whether or not it meets the definition in the charter. But we have to even step back even further now and have a look at the whole concept of what is the charter, how does it apply to us? And so the reality is that there is a vertical relationship between us as citizens and the government, okay? So the government has all the power.
Right.
It has police power. It has, it can take us off the street, put us in jail kind of thing, right? So, you're dealing with power.
Right.
And the charter was meant to be a buffer between the government and us as citizens. But what happens if the philosophy of the government is such that it doesn't matter, in their view, with infringing a wee little bit as long as it gets its public objective carried out, right? And you can come up with all kinds of rationale as to why it's the proper thing to do in this particular situation. Right. And so then government says, okay, you know what? We're going to take the risk, in essence. Like, I mean, I don't know. I'm just kind of looking at the tea leaves, as it were. But I can imagine, and based on as well, though, on some of the memos that were coming out in some of this evidence in the cases, it would appear that government was sitting around, the government regulators, the lawyers and politicians and all the rest, and they were sitting around and saying, okay, look, we need to recognize that this is going to be a violation, right? Like, for example, on the Air Canada one, right? Oh, yeah, but you got to make sure you got to have your application on the website. Now, in the meantime, you're not going to give it much credence when someone applies for it, but we want to show that, hey, you know what? We recognize this human right here, where this charter right and so forth. And but on the other hand, we're going to, kind of tighten it up over there as far as applying it. And so what happens then is that you got this cat and mouse game going on, and it's a cost benefit analysis of the government saying, what's the chances that this particular crisis will go a certain length of time before, and it might even be over by the time someone goes to court.
Exactly.
And then when they go to court, guess what happens? With the Peckford and the Bernier case, so the case, the hearing is now towards the end of October, but back in June, you remember that the government relaxed its vaccine mandate requirements for travel, right? Which is what that case was about. So then they go to court, as they did just a couple of weeks ago, that, you know, it's all moot now.
Moot now, yeah.
Right? In other words, there's no legal case here to be tried because the government has just let the order lapse, and you know, we're wasting the court's time. The court shouldn't be using its precious time in dealing with a matter that has no practical significance. Now, the lawyers for Peckford and Bernier said, well, yeah, there is,
Yes.
you know, practical significance. And one of the things that the government has made very clear, it has suspended, in other words,
Not eliminated, right?
yeah, they're not, like, they can, the way the regulation is set up is that they can have the minister just make a decision on the spot, and then boom, it has the force of law. And so if you don't have any check and balance on that, we're into some very serious issues, because you've got a single individual with the authority of the state behind him, and who's making a decision that's going to affect your mobility rights, your, you know, your right to be able to make a living, to be able to travel, and to be able to, you know, your own religious perspective as to whether or not, you know, you want the vaccine or whatever. But so all of that comes into play, and we've got to have, it's extremely important that we have that check and balance. So there's a lot more to it here as well with respect to just the way the charter gets interpreted.
Right.
Because you can have all the law you want,
Okay.
but if it's going to be interpreted in a way that actually defeats the purpose, and this is what I argue, and I've argued this in a number of my writings, for example, charter values. That's a whole nother subject, but the point is that we have judicial philosophies in interpreting the charter that's having a dramatic effect on how that right is being manifested in the here and now.
Right, so, okay. But let me just go back to something, the unprecedented nature of this. So correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, the Canadian government respected conscientious objectors in the past.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, you actually did a documentary interviewing many of these folks, and while, you know, things weren't easy for them, but the government respected at least this idea that, I mean, doesn't that fall within the same, like, do these religious exemptions not fall sort of within that same, same parameters?
Well, I would make the argument that yes, it does. And granted, there were still things they had to do, right? They had to serve the same amount of time. We're talking about the conscientious objectors, World War II. They had to serve the same amount of time as regular conscripts in the work camps. But yes, but then once their time was up, they were out and, you know, living their life. But also, too, they were not required to bear arms, which is why the thing came up to be in the beginning, right? Or, you know.
But there was a war going on.
There was a war going on.
I mean,
and that's a very serious event, right? I mean, the life of the country itself is at stake.
Yes.
And so they were, nevertheless, said, okay, you're not going to bear arms, you go to the work camp.
Right.
Okay, so then what happened, though, is that the government, later on, in about 1943, allowed them to become medics. So if you had a conscientious objection against bearing arms, you could be a medic. And I talked to many of them who served right in the front line. I mean, literally in the front line with respect to, you know, picking up under fire, wounded soldiers, and all the rest.
Yeah, so it seems to me as a layperson looking at this from the outside that at some point here in the recent past, there was a shift
There was a
in how government would, or maybe I guess government, how this would be applied to the, to the citizens. Because I would argue that a world war is a pretty big deal.
It's a national crisis, no question about it.
And
Yeah.
so, and one other thing that sort of jumped out, I wanted to ask you, just a few minutes we have left. At what point do the individual rights? So here's what I've heard from some, from some folks, that the argument was used against them that maybe they belong to a particular denomination that didn't take a stand. Let's say, let's use vaccination as an example.
Yeah.
Oh, your denomination is not against vaccination, so you cannot hold that particular religious view because you're a member of this group. Right?
Yeah.
How does
That's totally against any understanding of religious freedom in Canada. How that came about is an absolute mystery, but it is, I think, I say it's a mystery. It's a mystery in the legal sense in one way, but it really isn't when you look at the cultural dynamics that's going on. I mean, I could get into the what I see as the philosophical underpinnings of why that was the case, but it's very, very troubling, extremely troubling, when you have this this right that you cannot have, or you just simply can't. You can't exercise that right, and yet it's been guaranteed to you, right? And so it's something that we just simply have to recognize that there has been a change in the way things are being applied, and we can get into that.
Yeah, so I think we're running out of time on this program. I think we always come to this conclusion that there's so much more for us to talk about, right?
Yeah.
But this is something that has been really, quite, troubling to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't speak to the vaccine. I'm not a doctor. I have no idea that. I think any kind of medical decision a person needs to make in consultation with their health professional and make a decision as to what is best for them.
Yeah.
But what I see as government overstepping in the terms of freedoms, in terms of religion, in religious expression. I mean, we need to do a whole program on this whole idea of misinformation.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems to be synonymous with what it is that, I don't agree with now is considered, misinformation. But I remember you guys arguing before in the past with religious liberty that when you're a diverse marketplace like we have here in Canada, every voice needs to be heard.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'd like to really, maybe on the next program, just really dig into your question as to the reason why these individuals whose religious denominations said they have no problem with the vaccine, and why is it that the individual was not respected? That's so key.
I think we've just got a cliffhanger. Yeah. So we want to invite our viewers to join us on the next time around. We'll have Dr. Bussey back, and we'll look specifically at that topic. Dr. Bussey, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
We're going to close the program with a word of prayer.
Okay.
Heavenly Father, thank you so much for everything you do for us, your love, your mercy, your kindness. Thank you for those inalienable rights that you have bestowed upon each and every one of us. And Father, I just pray that you bring guidance to the authorities, to everyone, that we all may humble ourselves before you and just be governed by your grace and your goodness. Bless each and every viewer, I pray, in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, we've come to the end of another Lessons for Living television program. I want to thank you so much for joining us. I want to encourage you to go on your website, go under the previous programs tab, and what I'm going to do there is I'm going to pull all of the programs we've done on religious liberties with Barry, or Dr. Bussey, and we will have those there, and you can have a look, and you can watch all of those. And Dr. Bussey, thank you so much for being with us.
It was great to be with you, Bill.
Let folks know a little bit about First Freedoms Foundation, how they can reach out to you.
Sure. First Freedoms Foundation can be found at www.firstfreedoms.ca. So First Freedoms, plural, on the freedoms.ca. And we've got a running blog. We've got a program we call a Freedom Feature, where I interview with all kinds of different public policy people, lawyers, law professors, journalists on the issues of the day.
It's excellent. It's an excellent resource, and we're very grateful that you have undertaken that very worthwhile project. Thank you so much. Again, if you go on our website, l4ltv.com, if you click under the previous programs tab, you're going to see a button there you can click, and that'll take you straight to Dr. Bussey's organization. And I would encourage you to support them both with likes and watching and with financial donations to keep these very worthwhile organizations going and fighting for freedoms. Check out our Instagram page every morning, 6:30 a.m. Eastern Time. I put out a 1-minute devotional. Follow me on Instagram. Like our Facebook page. Follow me on Twitter. And an audio version of this program will be available on our SoundCloud account about half an hour from the end of the program. We're all out of time. We look forward to doing this again real soon. We hope you'll be with us. Take care. We'll see you then.